Hey, awesome students. This video is going to take you through a sample essay that is in response to our Justin Jones analysis essay prompt. I'm going to dive straight into it because I want to keep this to 15 minutes. So when looking at the sample essay, it seems as though the writer broke the prompt down into these sections. You'll notice that their first body paragraph only deals with the first paragraph of Jones's speech. Their second body paragraph deals with these two paragraphs. Their third body paragraph deals with these three paragraphs. And then the writer has this kind of fourth body paragraph slash conclusion that deals with just this final paragraph. And so when we're looking at this sample, these are the things I want you to watch out for. The essay has a really strong thesis that we're going to dig into, as well as topic sentences that build a line of reasoning that supports this strong thesis. A lot of you guys got feedback from me that says that your topic sentences are not building a line of reasoning. And so we'll make sure to stop and look at what that actually looks like. I also want for you guys to look at the way evidence is incorporated through a variety of long quotes, breakout quotes, and paraphrasing. I want us to talk about quality over quantity analysis because this is a big error that some of the strongest writers in our classes made that brought down their scores. And so we want to make sure we fix this so that you guys can be getting the scores that you should. And then also I want to talk about only including a conclusion if it's worth it. So let's take a look at the sample essay. So the sample essay, this is their thesis. So go ahead and pause the video and read the thesis to yourself. All right, now that you have the thesis read, we're not going to talk about it quite yet. We will come back to it multiple times to talk about why this thesis is strong. Let's dive into the first body paragraph. So go ahead and pause and read this whole first body paragraph through from beginning to end. Now that you've read the first body paragraph, let's break down what it does well. So first, it has a really strong opening topic sentence. One, it's creative. It has this use of dashes that emphasizes the Mr. Speaker, which you'll see that the writer uses throughout their essay. And also, they clearly set up what they're going to prove, that Jones is making Mr. Speaker seem very unethical. So the purpose of this paragraph is clear. Then when we move on, the next thing I want you guys to see is this quality over quantity of evidence. So we see a breakout quote here. So one way to incorporate evidence when they say the world is watching Tennessee and also Mr. Speaker. These are very short quotes. We also see in the next one, again, another breakout quote, lynch mob, another breakout quote, our democratic process. So these are very short quotes that the author is using. We call these breakout quotes. They are what strong writers use because it allows for you to keep your writer voice strong and consistent throughout while still pulling in evidence. But also what I want us to look at is how many sentences are dedicated to just focusing on the rhetorical purpose of the world is watching Tennessee. The author doesn't just say, oh, it's repeated to emphasize that the world is watching. The author really digs into what's important about this line. They make the concession that it is hyperbolic, but also that it's emphasizing that everyone's watching Tennessee. Okay, check. But then they don't stop there. They continue on saying, like, really digging into what this means. The nation wants to see if Tennessee is going to quiet those calling for gun legislation through extreme punishment. So it emphasizes this idea of extreme punishment, which will lead into their later argument that Jones is saying that it's unlawful punishment. And then it dives into why Jones is doing this. He wants the Speaker and the House itself to feel like they're being watched, to feel like their reputations are at stake. So we have multiple sentences here where the writer is digging into this single breakout quote. We then see them do that again where they dig into this use of lynch mob and the democratic process, and they analyze how this creates an either or reasoning where essentially Mr. Speaker is the bad guy and Jones is the good guy. And so we see multiple sentences digging into this breakout quote. So I want for you guys to notice how you shouldn't say every single thing that Jones is doing. Pick 2 things and then really analyze them and show how they work together for a common purpose that this writer or speaker wants to achieve. Now let's go back to the thesis. So here we see that this first body paragraph is represented by this part of the thesis. Jones creates a dichotomy between himself, a hero, and the Speaker of the House who seeks to lynch democracy. We see that the thesis pulls on specific language, dichotomy, the idea of lynching, democracy, and we see the direct references within that paragraph. I think it's very likely that this writer went and wrote this thesis last because it directly references so many aspects of that first paragraph. And since you guys get to type these essays, do that. Just make sure you leave yourself enough time, but go back and write your thesis so that it clearly relates back to the first body paragraph. All right, let's go look at the second body paragraph. Go ahead and pause your video and read the second body paragraph from beginning to end. All right, now that you've read it, let's dive into the topic sentence. So when we're asking for your topic sentences to create a line of reasoning, you need to make sure that your topic sentence references back to what the previous paragraph has done, and then explain how this next paragraph is going to build upon it. So we see the author says the ethos Jones establishes by identifying himself as fighting against the House Speaker's violent act against democracy. That part of the topic sentence goes back to the previous paragraph. That is what the previous paragraph proved. Then it says is furthered. So we know that this paragraph is going to elaborate. It's going to add on. It agrees with the previous paragraph. And it's going to do that by showing how Jones clarifies that the fight is not for himself, but rather for the people. And so we see that the person who wrote this essay is going to further show how Jones is developing his ethos. And so we see a line of reasoning develop where this paragraph does not start over new, forgetting everything that's been written, it's building. So that's what we're talking about when we say that topic sentences build a line of reasoning. All right, let's move forward. Again, we see the author really focusing in on just a few things that Jones's does. So this entire highlighted section just focuses on his 78,000 people quote. And so here I do want you to see that this is a long quote that this writer employs. So long quote. But then from the long quote, they take breakout quotes. They emphasize the I from the long quote, and they emphasize the 78,000 people and constituents from the long quote. So if you have a long quote, make sure that you are pointing out specifically what you want your readers to notice about the long quote. You shouldn't have a long quote and then talk about it generally. Point out the things you want them to notice. And then they talk about why Jones has that information in there. And then they move on to their kind of second focus. Again, quality over quantity. We have this internal transitioning on the contrary. We definitely want, as you move from your first focus to your second focus, to have transitioning to indicate that shift. And so here this emphasizes that Jones is kind of bringing up a new point that is in contrast. So Jones is emphasizing that he's a hero representing his voter base. And then the author brings in another long quote, which they then pull out a breakout quote from. Long quote that's actually, they use an ellipses so that it's not longer than it needs to be. And they pull out the word plaguing. We see that this writer likes to use parentheses. We've seen it a couple times now. That's their stylistic kind of tendency. It's cool to see. And so they point out this kind of side note about the pandemic. And then they dive back into kind of how that supports his Jones argument. And then here they have a very clear wrap up as to what all of this that they've written about before, kind of the effect that it has. Jones essentially is painting himself as a martyr. All right, so now let's return to our thesis. So we see that that second body paragraph is represented in the thesis here by utilizing ethos to prove his actions represent his constituents. So we see here that the thesis directly relates back to the second body paragraph, especially its topic sentence. So we see a line of reasoning building that relates back to the primary claim of the thesis. All right, let's go look at the third body paragraph. If you could go ahead and pause and read this third body paragraph from beginning to end. All right, now that you've read this third body paragraph, I want us to really focus in on how, if you choose to analyze logos, you need to make sure you do it right. Analyzing logos is super hard, and if you don't feel comfortable doing it, then don't do it. But a lot of people chose to analyze Jones's use of logos, but when you went to analyze the logos, it was clear that maybe you didn't really know how. And so I wanted to definitely look at this example because this writer analyzes the logos really well. And so here again, we have a topic sentence that references back to the previous paragraph and then shows how this paragraph is going to add on. And they do that really well, really quickly. Then we go into, this is a cool organizational thing they do. I think because analyzing logos is so hard, they set up a really clear organizational structure of the two things they're going to analyze. And then they dive into analyzing Article 2, Section 27. And to do this, they point out how Jones has essentially set up if-then reasoning. And they break down how the if-then reasoning works. And so if you're going to analyze logos, you need to go back and make sure you understand if-then reasoning, inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, so that you can use those tools to analyze how logos is occurring. Then here they go to the second instance of logos that Jones uses, and then they break down how he's essentially, they don't call it an analogy, but what they're doing is analyzing how Jones creates a comparison between past expulsions and his expulsion to prove that they aren't analogous, that it doesn't make sense the way that the expulsion is being used. And they do a really good job of showing how Jones uses logos to prove that. So take a really dig into this paragraph if you want to be able to analyze logos, see how this writer analyzes logos, and that way you know how to do it on your own for future essays. All right, again, we go back to the thesis and we see how the thesis also is representing that third body paragraph, utilizing logos to prove his that's a typo, his protest against gun violence are protected by law. And again, if you have typos like this, it's not going to hurt you. So don't worry about minor typos. They happen in timed writings. They're inevitable. And so we see that this thesis really does a great job of showing first, second, and third body paragraph. And so you want your thesis to do that. And really the best way to do that is by making sure you leave yourself time to write it after you've written your body paragraphs. And so the author also had this kind of fourth body paragraph conclusion. So go ahead and pause and read this from beginning to end. So now that you've read this, I want your takeaway to be that you should only have a conclusion if it's really worth it. If you don't have time to make a conclusion that's worth it, just end your third body paragraph conclusively. I have a final sentence there that kind of wraps it all up. But if you do have time to write a conclusion, it should kind of look like this one. So the writer does kind of just wrap up what they've proven in their essay. And a lot of student writers would just stop here. But the reason why this conclusion is actually worth it is because of this second part, where they bring in this kind of threat that Jones makes at the end and how it really ends on a rally cry for those who are going to support him. So this added part makes this conclusion really worth the time that the student took to write it. So keep that in mind. So ultimately, let's return back to the very beginning. Keep in mind a strong thesis and how it's represented by each of the paragraphs in the order that the paragraphs occur. Make sure that your topic sentences build a line of reasoning by referencing back to the previous paragraph and showing how this next paragraph is either going to agree or disagree. Make sure that you're using long quotes And if you use long quotes, make sure you're definitely using breakout quotes with them, or just use breakout quotes on their own. And also paraphrase. I didn't mention this, but a lot of paraphrasing is used in the logos paragraph. Make sure you're choosing quality over quantity and only have an conclusion if it's worth it. All right, guys, my video time's about to end. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in class. Bye.